And now, from the Room 111 studios, it's Hacking Engagement with James Sturnovic.
Well, hey there, listener, and welcome back to the Hacking Engagement podcast. I'm so glad you're here. I think all of us are back in school now. I mean, in Ohio, we started about, 3 weeks ago. Down south, they started even sooner than that. But I think everyone's back, including my friends back on the East Coast. So welcome back to another school year, everyone. And I was thinking about an episode to do that would really help everyone. and I love this episode, man. I just love it so much. And, a lot of times we focus on tech tools or tactics or this is something. This is a mindset that I'm going to put you in today that will not only help you with your students, but also help you in your romantic relationships. Now, how is that for a sales pitch? What we're going to talk about today is, let me just set it up first. I teach 6 classes a day. I have upwards of 150 students, and they just come at me in waves. There are times when I feel like I'm being invaded. Like, I don't know, I'm on the wrong side of the D-Day invasion. And so what happens is, you're trying to remember these kids' names. You're trying to give them your undivided attention. Sometimes between class, you don't have time to you got to do stuff between class. You don't have a time to give this young person your full attention, which is wrong. And so I wrote this book in 2014 called You've Got to Connect. This was the first book I had published. I mean, I love this book, man. And I have a link on my show notes, and I devoted an entire chapter of this book on connecting with students to nonverbal communication. Now, nonverbal communication is essential. See, it is the way we used to communicate back before there were words. There was a time when there was no words. Certainly no podcasts. If you don't understand the power of nonverbal communication, think about this. You're trying to communicate with someone who speaks a different language than you do. So, of course, your facial expressions become extremely animated. You use lots of arm gestures. I mean, I do that anyway. But they really become pronounced if I'm trying to communicate with someone who doesn't speak English. Your dog is a champion at nonverbal communication. When she studies you, I mean, she doesn't know many words. She knows some, but not many. When she studies you, she's looking for those nonverbal cues to understand what's going on. So when you smile at her, you grab the leash, you start eating, she starts focusing on your movements and what you're communicating to her from a nonverbal standpoint very, very acutely. Now, what's crazy about nonverbal communication, a lot of it's involuntary. I mean, we don't even realize the messages that we are communicating to our students. And so today, I'm going to give you some tactics. Here we go with tactics again to open up the nonverbal communication channels and help build those strong bonds with your kids, which are essential to engagement. And if you could see my nonverbal communication right now, I would be communicating that. Buckle up, man. You're going to love this episode. Hey, so get this, listener. My publisher contacts me and says, I love the way Hacking Engagement is selling. How about doing 50 more? I was all over it like a cheap suit. So the name of the book is Hacking Engagement Again, 50 Teacher Tools That Will Make Students Love Your Class. And it's going to be available on Amazon's virtual shelves in the late summer of 2017. In the meantime, if you're looking for more teacher empowerment resources, as always, visit hacklearning.org. Now let's get back to the solutions part of the Hacking Engagement podcast. Now, I learned about body language by reading a spectacular book. It's a spectacular book. And of course, I'll have a link to it on my show notes. It's called The Definitive Book of Body Language by Alan and Barbara Peace. I read this book in doing my research for my first book. And I have to tell you something, man. It's just a joy to read. It's funny. I highly recommend it. In order for me to impress upon you the importance of nonverbal communication, you have to indulge me. You have to listen to this story from my youth. And so we're going to climb into Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine, and we're going to go all the way back to the winter of 1977. Now, probably some of you listeners weren't alive in 1977. Maybe some of you were alive but weren't coherent yet, didn't know where you were or what you were doing, because you were young. But if you were around in 1977, and if you were coherent in 1977, and if you lived in the Midwest or Northeast in 1977, you know that that was a heck of a winter. Oh my gosh. And I went to school. I was in high school. And I was a sophomore in high school. I went to school in this little town in southeastern Ohio, out in the sticks and out in the hills. And man, we just were never in school. We got a month of snow days. It was awesome. So my friends and I, we just walked around town and just got into all kinds of stuff and didn't worry much about school, but certainly capitalized on the social aspects of being a young person. And what happened was, your sophomore year of high school, in Ohio at least, kids started getting their driver's license. So I had this friend, great friend, called Garland. And Garland got his driver's license first in my social circle. I have another good buddy. His name's Jim. And so we decided that we were going to celebrate the fact that my friend Garland got his driver's license. Now, you got to understand that this was a big deal. And so we decided to go on this triple date. Now, Jim and Garland both had girlfriends. I did not have a girlfriend, but I was told that a girl in a neighboring town thought I was cute. I thought she was cute. So I rolled the dice and asked her out, and she said yes, which was exciting. So we decided, we're 15, 16-year-old kids. We decided to go to take these young ladies to a movie. So we all climbed into my friend Garland's Cutlass Supreme. Now what happened was, Garland and Jim both have girlfriends. So Garland's girlfriend slides right in the middle seat in front, right next to Garland. Jim and his girlfriend, they slide right in the back. She slides right in the middle seat, right next to Jim. So that left my date and me in an awkward situation. She sat in the front and I sat in the back. Now, this is our first date. And we're driving to the movie theater and I barely said a word to her. And all I had to do was stare at the back of her pretty head, for 10 miles, whatever. And this is just a little sidebar. This was back in the day. Now, this will mean nothing to most people, but this was back in the day when pop music had not migrated to the FM side of the radio dial yet. So we were listening to AM radio, for crying out loud. And, in southeastern Ohio, there were no strong stations. We were listening to, I remember this vividly, WABC out of New York, which was full of static. Everybody's in the car yakking. My date and I, my date doesn't know these guys. I don't know my date. It was kind of awkward. And I got the impression when we got to the movie theater, the date hadn't gone well. My brilliant friends selected the movie Rocky. Rocky, 1976, baby. Sly Stallone in 1976 was a hunk of burning love. So I plopped down in this seat beside my date. This amazing Italian stallion comes on, all glistened up and buffed up. He's just Adonis. And I'm sitting here and I weigh 140 pounds, perhaps. It was not a favorable comparison. So I'm thinking, well, this date is not going well. So as the movie unfolds, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that this is a pretty cool movie. And my date and I actually started talking a little bit. So I started to feel better about the date. Then the movie ends. Get this, listener. My friend Garland had absolutely no inhibitions whatsoever. Zero tact, but no inhibitions, and tremendous courage. So he said, hey, it's 90 minutes before we have to have the girls home. Let's go parking. Now, my date didn't object, which I thought was pretty exciting, but there's 6 of us in one car. And so while my friend Garland was really courageous, I was resourceful. I had a plan, man. I was wearing a wristwatch, and that's something I used to wear because we had to. And I said, well, here's my idea, guys. How about if Garland and his girlfriend sit in the front seat and kiss, whatever, and Jim and his girlfriend sit in the back seat and kiss, and I'll take my date and we'll go out for a walk for 5 minutes, and then we'll come in and then we'll do like a musical chairs situation. We'll slide in the back, Jim slides in the front, Garland, you take a walk. When I think back to this, I'm amazed at how uninhibited we were, man. It's a beautiful memory. Well, here's the take home for this lengthy story. My date and I went in the back seat, and I was finally getting up the courage to give her a kiss. And I looked at her face. Now, there wasn't much in the way of light. It was dark in the car, but it was light enough for me to look at her eyes and notice that her eyes were like hockey pucks. There was no iris visible. Her eyes were just massive. And this was not simple dilation to try to accommodate the darkness of the car. This was something different. I knew that there was something different, and I also knew that my girlfriend was as attracted to me as I was attracted to her. That was the beauty. That was the light bulb when I realized that nonverbal communication has tremendous power. So my challenge then became, how can I take this knowledge that I learned as a young person, if a girl likes you, her pupils dilate, and translate it into everyday communications that I have with kids? And that was my task in my book, You've Got to Connect. So here's the deal, man. I like to go on interesting sidebars in class. I think it makes the material more interesting. So if you start talking about, body language in class in conjunction with doing your regular curriculum, sometimes it makes your regular curriculum more interesting. So here's the thing. Here's the way I generally promoted this. I don't tell them the story about going out with a girl in the winter of 1977. But what I do tell them is, let's say that you're going to ask somebody out for the first time. It's great to throw in romantic connections. It really makes kids sit up and pay attention. So I said, you walk up to a young woman or a young guy, and you're trying to figure out if they're interested in going out with you. So I lay some body language cues on them. I say, look down at their feet. If their feet are pointed at you, they're focused on you. If their feet are pointed away from you, then they probably don't want to have a very long interaction. If their arms are open, it means they're open to you. If their hands are behind their back, they're not intimidated by you. They're not concerned about you. If they tilt their head to one side, they're actually exposing their jugular to you and are very comfortable in your presence. So I just lay this on kids, and they get a big kick out of it. But here's the thing, man. I always talk about nonverbal communication in my class, and I get my kids to monitor me. It's kind of like when I talked about feng shui in my class, how I deputize my students to check my body language. And if I am not giving them full attention body language, man, they call me out. So here are the markers that I have my students focus on. Number one is the feet. And I mentioned this, if you're asking somebody out for the first time, you can look down at their feet and get a good read on how they feel about you. So my policy in my room is when someone is interacting with another person, it's essential that they point their feet at that person. It is this demonstration that they have their full attention. What's funny is my principal walked in not long ago, and he had a message to deliver to me or a student, I forget which. And you know how principals are during the day. He had 1,000 things to do in the period, and he came hustling in, and he said so-and-so, blah, 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 delivered his message, whatever, and he's getting ready to leave. And I said, hold on, freeze, do not move. Everyone looked down at Mr. Jado's feet. And Mr. Jado's feet were pointed toward the door because he had to get out the door and do his next mission. Everybody laughed. Mr. Jados laughed. It was a great teachable moment. So you can do that the next time your principal walks in, as long as they don't get mad. Use your own judgment on that. So feet. Number one, feet. Look at the feet. Number two, arms and legs, man. If you are talking to someone and they are twisted like a pretzel, their arms are folded, their legs are crossed, they're not exceptionally open to your message. Now, sometimes, you have to factor in other variables. Like I can tell you in Ohio in January, it's pretty hard not to be twisted up like a pretzel because you're cold. But factor that in. And so if a student is interacting with me and I'm twisted up like a pretzel, they'll call me out. If I'm interacting with a student and they're twisted up like a pretzel, I'll call them out. And not only just arms and legs, but also hands. Do you realize that if you expose your palms to someone, that you're trying to put them at ease? And what I like to do when I greet kids in the hallway is I like to expose my palms and say, look, no weapons. You have nothing to fear from me. Just a bizarre thing I do. Now let's talk eye contact. Eye contact is tricky because in some cultures, making strong eye contact with your teacher is a no-no. So you have to factor in that variable as well. But in general, if you're talking to a student who's comfortable with eye contact, a great thing to do is to maintain eye contact when you're interacting with somebody. Otherwise, it makes it seem like you want this conversation to end and you want to move on to whatever you got to move on to. Something else that I like to do, speaking of the head, is if someone is making a point to you, make eye contact and nod slowly as an affirmation that you are understanding what's being communicated to you. And you might, in fact, endorse what's being communicated to you. And when it comes to expressions in general, try to match that student's expression. If that student is showing concern, show concern on your face. If that student is smiling, give them a smile for crying out loud. Don't be so stingy with this. And finally, if you want to do something really funny, and you can try this on your spouse, see if your spouse even notices, try mirroring their body language. If they're sitting with their legs crossed, you cross your legs. If they're leaning forward, you lean forward. If they put their chin on their fist, you put your chin on your fist, and see if they even notice. Try it with your spouse or significant other this evening. It might make them angry. So here we are at the What You Can Do Tomorrow section. Man, I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have enjoyed recording it. And I talked about my book, You've Got to Connect, which was published in 2014. But man, hacking engagement again, hack 73, bam. Listen to students with your entire body. I love that hack. So here's what you can do tomorrow. Practice on your significant other or family member. You prepare for class at home. Why not become a better nonverbal listener at home as well? A little relationship advice, thank you. Next, you want to enlighten students about your goal. Let your students in on your objective to become a better nonverbal listener. This will be a lot of fun, and it'll put active nonverbal listening on everyone's radar. Who knows? In your quest to become an active nonverbal listener, you may just create 30 disciples. Play an active listening game. Have students pair up and take turns describing an experience to one another. Once the interaction concludes, instruct the talking student to record observations about the listener's nonverbal signals. Have student performers demonstrate effective nonverbal listening techniques. Have small groups of students role-play effective nonverbal listening techniques. And then finally, practice nonverbal listening in one-on-one interactions. Encourage conversations with students where you can consciously practice listening with your entire body. Students who don't sense your listening will not feel valued. Work on your nonverbal listening skills to engage kids and teach them the same skills. Good luck tomorrow engaging your students.
Show notes for this episode can be found at jamesalansturnevant.com. If you enjoy Hacking Engagement, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes.